Okay, everyone, here we go. We're ready for Chapter 2 of Addison Cook. Chapter 2, The Legend of Atahualpa. Aunt Delia dropped Addison and Molly off in the front of the New York Museum of Archaeology. It was a sprawling marble building, backlit by lightning strikes and the glowing night sky. Trees bent under the lash of the whipping wind. Addison and Molly dashed through the heavy raindrops of the growing storm, splashing their way through the puddles to the basement entrance. Aunt Dahlia and Uncle Nigel were museum curators, so Addison and Molly knew the wooded grounds by heart. They cut through a maze of hedges and ducked under an arched portico. Skimming rainwater from his face, Addison found the basement key hidden in a crack of loose mortar. He unlocked the creaking iron door and hauled it open with all his strength. He and Molly slipped inside from the howling rainstorm, the great door booming shut behind them. The New York Museum of Archaeology was Addison's favorite place in the world. Great echoing halls filled with Egyptian mummies, Mongolian battle armor, and Viking warships, and the eastern wing of an Aztec temple. Deep down in the musty, snaking passageways of the basement archives was a secret underground world the public never saw. A labyrinth of vaults where millions of specimens were filed and stored. This was their uncle's workplace. Addison and Molly trotted through the dark corridors by feel, listening to the rising thunder rattle the cement walls above. They passed along the hallway, crammed with crates of Ice Age bones from the Hall of Paleontology, saber-toothed tiger skulls with teeth curved like Arabian sickle swords, giant sloth femurs heavy as tree limbs, dire wolf claws sharp as switchblades. At last, they spotted a light glowing from an office at the end of the dark passage. "Uncle Nigel, we're here," Molly called. Professor Nigel Cook chewed on the stem of his antique calabash pipe, curved like a bull's horn. His eyes gleamed behind polished spectacles as he considered Addison and Molly. He was the sort of man who knew almost everything about the year 1493 and almost nothing about the year he was currently living in. Today, he greeted Addison and Molly in ancient Greece. "Azapazmanai," and Kahir, said Addison and Molly, heaving aside the elephant tusk so they could sit on the tattered leathered couch by the filing cabinet. "Tea parite?" Uncle Nigel asked. "Pretty good," said Molly, although Addison made us miss the bus again. "Molly!" "I bet your aunt was ecstatic." Uncle Nigel laughed gently. Like Addison's father, Uncle Nigel was from Surrey, England. He was Oxford educated and spoke with a proper British accent. Addison loved his uncle's speech, each word so crisp, like biting off a piece of fresh celery. "Ecstatic is not the word I would have used to describe Aunt Delia," said Addison. "Your aunt has a lot to worry about right now," explained Uncle Nigel. "People don't visit the museum as often as they used to, so your aunt and I have to work incessantly, like slinkies on an escalator. If we don't find a great exhibit that will draw visitors back to the museum, our funding will be slashed, and..." Uncle Nigel's voice trailed off. Then, looking hard at Addison and Molly, he seemed to decide that honesty was the best policy, and we could lose our jobs. Addison and Molly weren't sure how to respond. Molly busied herself picking out bits of turf from her cleats. Addison drew in his notebook, sketching the Cherokee headdress he saw draped over the filing cabinet behind him. I take your point. Oh, nope. To this point, continued Uncle Nigel, your aunt is on a short fuse. And you'd be wise to be model children for her until we sail through this rough patch. I take your point, said Addison. Model children, agreed Molly. A waft of Uncle Nigel's tobacco smoke made her crinkle up her eyes and sneeze loudly. Benedicte, said Uncle Nigel, excusing her in Latin. Grati tibi, Molly said, thanking him automatically. Well, that's enough serious talk, said Uncle Nigel. I just returned from a big dig in the jungles of Bolivia and found the most improbable relic. An artifact that's not even supposed to exist. I don't suppose you'd like to see it. I don't see why not, said Addison, who could think of nothing better than a strange relic from a distant country. Uncle Nigel carefully repacked his pipe, using the desk magnifying glass he usually reserved for archaeology. As a professor, he was absent-minded in many tasks, but packing a pipe he treated with surgical precision. You're familiar with Inca history, right? That's all Addison's been reading about since you left for Bolivia, answered Molly. Then you must know how the Inca Empire fell. A bit, said Addison. Well, I'd like to hear, said Molly. Uncle Nigel struck a match and carefully puffed his antique pipe to life. Aside from his clothes and spectacles, he really owned very little from this century. With thunder rumbling outside like a distant cannonade, Uncle Nigel cleared his throat and began. 500 years ago, there lived the last king of the Incas. King Atahualpa, Addison piped in. Precisely. Nigel nodded. King Atahualpa battled with his own family for the right to his throne. It was a destructive war. By the time the Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro invaded Peru, Atahualpa's army was exhausted. Atahualpa tried to fight Pizarro alone without the help of his family's army, but Pizarro easily conquered and divided the Inca and threw Atahualpa in a great dungeon. As Nigel talked, Addison's eyes darted to the shadowy corners of the office, containing relics from every era of history. Ancient maps, papyrus scrolls, decaying mummies, blood-encrusted samurai swords. From feudal Japan, Maasai spears decorated with ostrich feathers. The fossil skeleton of an extinct dodo bird. Even a 10-foot tusk of a narwhal, spiraled like a unicorn's horn. King Atahualpa bargained with Pizarro, continued Uncle Nigel. The king offered to fill his dungeon once over with gold and twice over with silver if Pizarro would set him free. Pizarro only wanted treasure, and so immediately agreed. The Incas prepared the enormous ransom. Gold vases filled with emeralds, silver chalices overflowing with rubies, and intricately carved gold statues of animals, birds, and Incan gods. It took 60,000 Incas to haul the 750 tons of gold across the empire into Peru. How much is 750 tons of gold? Asked Molly. Uncle Nigel drew on his pipe so the embers glowed and said, picture 150 school buses filled with treasure. PS 141 only had 10 school buses. So Addison pictured a nearly endless line of school buses, heavily laden with gold, parked down the entire length of Central Park. At the last moment, Uncle Nigel went on, Atahualpa's bickering family failed him once more. His brother's army attacked Pizarro before the ransom could be delivered. So the Spanish conquistadors sacked the Inca army and called off the deal. Pizarro burned Atahualpa alive at the stake. Molly grimaced, and then crinkled her nose, and then sneezed. Lots of people were burned at the stake, Mo, said Addison. It was a popular way to kill people during the Spanish Inquisition. Uncle Nigel nodded and wound up his tale. The Incas never delivered their treasure. Instead, they locked it in a secret chamber and hid 3 keys across the Incan Empire. Each key contains a clue leading to the next key. Locals believe Atahualpa's treasure is cursed, for fortune hunters have searched for it over the centuries, and none have returned alive. Legends say that the treasure vault will open only for someone who has learned from King Atahualpa's mistakes. Uncle Nigel gazed pensively at the red glow in his pipe. He blew thin curls of smoke from his nostrils that wafted slowly up to the shadowed recesses of the ceiling rafters. So, what did you find in your dig in Bolivia? Addison asked quietly. Oh, only this, replied Uncle Nigel, unlocking the safe from behind his desk and removing a fragile wooden box. He pried open the mildewed lid and tilted it to the light. Addison's jaw dropped in amazement. Molly's followed suit. Inside the box lay an intricately carved stone, roughly the size of a large chess piece. One of the 3 keys, cried Addison. More thunder broke outside the museum. It shook the walls as if giants upstairs were rearranging their furniture and repeatedly changing their minds about where to set the couch. The wind howled so fiercely it could be heard even in the basement. Molly shivered. Is it real? Uncle Nigel allowed himself a smile. I'm pretty sure it's Atahualpa's first key, he replied, his precise Oxford English elegantly slicing the words into perfect squares. Though the key is made of stone, so it can't be carbon dated. More's the pity, said Addison. Luckily, continued Uncle Nigel, whoever created this key dated it for us. The Spanish inscription says AD 1533, the same year Atahualpa was murdered. Addison flipped open his notebook. Using a method Uncle Nigel had taught him, he delicately flattened a blank page over the stone key and rubbed it with the side of his pencil to trace an exact copy. If the legend is true, Uncle Nigel went on, the riddle engraved on this key leads to the second key. The second key leads to the third key, and the third key leads to the treasure of the Incas? Addison's mind was reeling and dizzy with the thought. Never in his life had he wanted his uncle's job so badly. Uncle Nigel carefully retrieved the key from Addison's grasp, cleaning it with a special brush from his desk. Treasure hunters have searched in vain for the key for 500 years, he said. If the legends are true, the remaining clues to the treasure are still undisturbed, and, well, now you can understand why I have so much work to do. Archaeology is 5% field research and 95% paperwork. I need to get back to my reports. But it's dinner time, Molly protested, and we're starving. Plus, you deserve a celebration, cried Addison. Can we eat dinner in the prehistoric man diorama? Or maybe a picnic in the Roman court, suggested Molly. Ooh, and then we could watch the rainstorm from the greenhouse on the rooftop garden, offered Addison. Or go rollerblading in the Chinese pagoda. Now you know there's no rollerblading in the pagoda, said Uncle Nigel, his eyes already fixed on his field notes. And I'm sorry, you guys, but I have too much work to have dinner with you. He tossed his wallet to Addison, who caught it one-handed. Go grab yourself some food from the vending machines down the hallway. But Uncle Nigel, I'm sorry, that's final. Molly and Addison shared a look. Addison shrugged, and they shuffled out. You know the drill, called Uncle Nigel. Don't visit the museum exhibits after dark. And whatever you do, don't touch anything. Okay, that is the first half of chapter 2. Thank you.